Today, we complete 4 whole years of testing the dollar cost average strategy. To borrow a phrase from Ron Burgundy, this is kind of a big deal.
This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as financial advice. All views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the host and/or any guests that we might have from time to time. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or to follow a particular investing strategy.
Guten Tag, buenos dias, morgen, and welcome to episode 226 of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. Today, a little later in the episode, we will be making our 209th weekly Bitcoin DCA stack. That will mark 4 years of testing the dollar cost average strategy. Almost an entire cycle, not from start to finish, but covering all of the last hype cycle between the two all-time highs, the double top, so to speak, the bear market, the sideways crab market, the next halving, this most recent halving, and all the way back up to where we are now, getting ready to ramp up to what I believe is the still yet to come euphoria phase of this bull run cycle. Our very first DCA stack came on Wednesday, July 28th, 2021, in what was episode 2 of the fledgling Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. And I went back and re-listened to it today, and it was a little rough. Sometimes I feel like certain episodes went better than others, but reflecting back to 4 years ago, it's kind of amazing to see exactly how far we have come. So speaking of our first ever DCA Wednesday, it happened on July 28th, 2021, and it happened at block height 693,226. At the time, we purchased for a BTC US dollar price of $39,716.40, which meant we received 2,516 Satoshis per dollar. That purchased us a total of 49,224 sats, which is kind of amazing when you consider we're going to get less than 17,000 Satoshis, most likely, for today's purchase. At the time, it would take 22.08 ounces of gold to purchase just one Bitcoin. And the news stories that were making the rounds, the most important things that people were talking about at that time, was that China was in the middle of the miner crackdown. As you recall, China banned mining, and about 30% of the network hash rate had to find a place to relocate. Some of it, as I mentioned in either episode 2 or 3 of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast, migrated just across the border to other Southeast Asian countries. And others, well, a large percentage of it, obviously relocated to Texas, which has basically flipped China to where, well, there's more mining hash power in China right now than there probably ever was in China, or at least what left China, because there's still most likely some underground mining, if not lots of underground mining in China. Plan B was all the rage, with everybody talking about his stock to flow strategy, which had yet to not come true. He was forecasting, I think, 125,000 Bitcoin that cycle, and we peaked out at 69,000, of course. Again, the China miner crackdown, I firmly believe, had a large role in the reason why we had a double top instead of just a run up and a blow off top. We had the Elon Musk pump, with Elon announcing that Tesla was purchasing Bitcoin, et cetera, that Tesla would be accepting Bitcoin for payment. And that was kind of a premature pump, kind of like we had a bit of a premature pump this time around with the ETFs. Premature as in meaning it happened sooner than it normally would have as a result of the halving. In this case, this year, it happened before the halving. Then, of course, we had the letdown when Elon backtracked because he got so much pressure from the environmentalists. But I digress. Plan B was touting his stock to flow model. He was all over the place. Pretty much everybody was talking about stock to flow at that point in time, even Michael Saylor. And of course, do you remember Will Clemente? He was that teenage college dropout whiz kid who was also all over social media and the podcast circuit with his Bitcoin analysis. Also, in the summer of 2021, we had the Biden infrastructure bill. I often talk about just how much things have changed simply with the change of administrations here in the United States. So at this point last year, they were debating what would become the Biden infrastructure bill, which was basically the repackaged Green New Deal. And it had multiple impacts, or it was supposed to have multiple impacts on Bitcoin, including the broker rule, and a few other things which were later repealed, fortunately, when the Republicans took over and the Biden administration. A lot of the things that were going on then have just completely reversed. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that more. But on the very first DCA Wednesday, that was one of the things that everybody was talking about. All right. Besides celebrating 4 years of dollar cost averaging, we do have a lot of Bitcoin news to talk about today. So before we get into that, let's take our customary look at Bitcoin's current vital statistics. All those years ago, we were at block height 693,226. But at the time of this recording, we're sitting at block 906,754. And Bitcoin is ringing in at a US dollar value of $118,160 US dollars. That's, a little bit, about 4 or 5%, about 4% below the new all-time high of around 123,000. But when you zoom out, we're looking at less than $700 short of what our DCA Wednesday all-time high was. Last week at this time, we were talking about 118,840 Bitcoin, and that was the highest we had ever seen it on a Wednesday when we do our Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast DCA Wednesday series. So all things in perspective, as they say, zoom out. And when you zoom out, it tends to smooth things out, both the highs and the lows. And it looks like Bitcoin is right on track when you look at it from the 30,000 foot view, or in this case, the 7-day view. Of course, that means that we're going to receive a few more Satoshis for every dollar we convert into Bitcoin, 846 sats per dollar to be precise. So that's 5 cents, 5 sats per dollar more than if you had purchased at the 18,840 price last DCA Wednesday. And Bitcoin's current price gives it a market cap of 2.35 trillion US dollars, just slightly under the all-time high market cap, or the 2.36 trillion where we were sitting last DCA Wednesday, which was significantly higher than any previous market cap that we had seen. So again, zoom out, in this case on a weekly basis, and things are looking pretty darn rosy. I'm going to make an adjustment here real quick with the noise canceling on the soundboard. Bear with me for just 1 second. All right. For those of you who continue to value your wealth in shiny yellow rocks, it will currently cost you 34.6 ounces of gold to purchase just one Bitcoin. That is more than 12 and a half more ounces than it would have cost you had you converted gold into Bitcoin on that very first DCA Wednesday. And that is despite the fact that gold bugs like to talk about how gold is near its new all-time record high. But even with gold setting all-time record highs in fiat, it's trended significantly towards zero in Bitcoin terms in just the 4 years that we've been doing this podcast. For those of you who value wealth in something a little more tangible, one Bitcoin will currently purchase you 6,608 large pepperoni pizzas from Papa John's. That is one pizza every day for more than 18 years. That's more than 4 cycles from now. And it's pretty amazing to think that in 2010, when Laszlo made that very first purchase and he paid 10,000 Bitcoin for two large pepperoni pizzas from Papa John's. Actually, it was 2 large pizzas from Papa John's. They weren't pepperoni, but I digress. We have gone from essentially 5,000 Bitcoin for a pizza to more than 6,000 pizzas per Bitcoin. So people talk about flippenings, and we have more than surpassed the Bitcoin pizza flippening. 1 second, I'm going to play with that noise canceling again. All right. I think that's a little better. That metric that has been my favorite for the entire history of this podcast, Bitcoin's 24-hour average transaction rate, is humming right along, averaging 4.23 transactions per second, significantly above the 3.14 transactions per second that anecdotally we've identified as an indicator of healthy on-chain activity and healthy price action. Again, that wasn't any kind of TA, but in 4 years of doing this podcast, every time we've seen Bitcoin significantly above about 3.14 transactions, the price has been on the rise, and it certainly remains that case today. Speaking of on-chain activity, the Bitcoin mempools are not quite as full as they were last DCA Wednesday. Last DCA Wednesday, we'd seen a spike from about 2,400 transactions pending all the way up to more than 30,000 pending transactions. Right now, Clark Moody's dashboard is showing just 4,334 pending transactions. Mempool.space is telling a much different story, and there's a reason for that. They're showing 58,477 pending transactions, but the reason for that is in the last couple of weeks, certain mempools have started accepting sub-Satoshi miner fees, less than 1 sat per VByte. So there are a whole heck of a lot of 0.4 and 0.5 transaction or Satoshis per VByte transactions pending in mempool.space's mempool. Clark Moody's dashboard and most other mempools don't currently include those sub-sat payment levels. The default setting for mempools currently is that anything less than 1 sat per VByte is excluded from the mempool. So that is the difference between Clark Moody's dashboard and mempool.space. And most of those other 54,000 transactions, obviously, they're not really competing against the 4,000 in Clark Moody's dashboard because, well, that 58,000 includes those, but the remaining 54,000 transactions, they're less than 1 sat per VByte. So if you've got a 1 or 2 sat per VByte transaction, obviously it will get mined before those other 54,000 transactions. And that's a whole nother story for a different day. Depending on how that progresses, it may or may not be worth doing an episode getting into that. Maybe possibly controversy or not so much controversy, depending on what your opinion is. If you do need to send an on-chain transaction, Clark Moody's fee estimator is saying that it will take a fee of 5 sats per VByte to guarantee you're in the next block. I'm kind of hesitant to think that's actually the case. I'm looking at the last several blocks, and the last 4 or 5 blocks all include about 1 sat per VByte. There's the last block included some 1 sat per VByte transactions. Before that, there were some 1.1 sat per VByte transactions, 1.19, 1.51, 1.75, for example. So significantly less than 5 sats per VByte. But again, if you are going to try and lowball a transaction and it's an important transaction, make sure you have the latest data before you do so. Clark Moody's dashboard is saying that if you have up to a day to wait, 1 sat per VByte will still be confirmed within a day. I find that completely reasonable, seeing as how I'm looking at several blocks where the 1 sat per VByte transactions right now. Mempool.space is saying a high priority transaction need only a 3 sat per VByte fee, which works out to just 50 cents in US dollar terms. And if you remember last week, or maybe it was a little longer than that, there was the mystery around the 80,000 Bitcoin that had been moved from old legacy wallets from around 2011, whether that was Bitcoin that was getting ready to be dumped or whatever. And I guess we've decided that was sense. Adam back transferring some of his old Bitcoin to his new SPAC treasury company that he partnered with Cantor Fitzgerald to do. So he was just moving Bitcoin. But it's amazing to think that those billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin could have been moved for just 3 sats per VByte. 50 cents to move billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin instantly, globally, really anonymously in his case, because nobody knew whose Bitcoin it was. Definitely pseudonymously, and without a third party or any other government agency or party that can tell you can't do that. And that's just pretty amazing. But that's why we're Bitcoiners. Mempool.space is saying that a medium priority transaction only needs a 1 sat per VByte fee, something that we just mentioned looks more than reasonable to me, and that any transaction, whether it's low or no priority, will eventually get mined for just 1 sat per VByte, sooner rather than later, since there's a lot of half a sat per VByte transactions in the mempools. We are just 446 blocks away from the next Bitcoin mining difficulty adjustment. As you know, Bitcoin adjusts the difficulty that it takes to find a block every 2016 blocks, which theoretically works out to about once every 2 weeks. And we're about 2 days away from the next difficulty adjustment. And that's going to be sometime on July 25th if all continues to go as it is. And we are looking at a very modest difficulty increase, anywhere from 0.2 to 0.09, or anywhere from 0.2 to 0.91%. And last week, it was looking like it could even be possibly a small decrease of 0.3%, but it's looking quite likely that we're going to get just a very modest increase now, with just 2 days left to go. And that is because during this difficulty epoch, blocks have been averaging 9 minutes and 59 seconds, which is just 1 second under that goal of 10 minutes in between blocks on average. Despite that, the 90-day estimate of hash rate has continued to increase, with an estimated 885.3 exahash of computer power securing the network, up from 878.5 last DCA Wednesday. So just like the price of Bitcoin continues to trend up and to the right, The computing power securing the network continues up and to the right as well, even though, as we had a couple weeks ago, we have little dips from time to time. For example, 3 weeks ago when there was a heat wave in Texas and a lot of the commercial mining companies like Riot agreed to shut their miners off and sell that power back to the grid, let that power flow to other customers. We saw a dip in hash rate and therefore a dip in mining difficulty, but we quickly made that back up with the last mining difficulty adjustment, and it looks like there will be yet another, albeit minor, difficulty increase in just 2 days. Basically, that only matters if you're a miner, because whether your transaction is confirmed within 9 minutes and 59 seconds or 10 minutes and 1 second really doesn't make that much difference. I mean, if you're sitting there and you send a transaction and you're timing it with a stopwatch, maybe you'd notice. But again, blocks come in pretty much randomly, right? The 2016 block average is an average of once every 10 minutes. And of course, blocks sometimes come in faster than that, and oftentimes they come in way slower than that. So really, as long as we have an incredibly robust network securing the blockchain, which we do, the minutia of whether it gets a little bit harder or a little bit easier to mine Bitcoin really only matters if you're a miner and you're worried about miner profitability at this point. Real quick, I want to take a minute to thank those of you listening on your favorite Podcasting 2.0 apps, such as Fountain. Podcasting 2.0 allows you to contribute value back to this podcast and others by either streaming sats on a minute-by-minute basis as you listen, where you set it, you figure maybe this is worth 1 Satoshi per minute of my time or 10 Satoshis per minute of my time. That's a you do you thing. And you dial that in, and then you just stream sats as you listen. Or the more popular method, which most people tend to do, that we've only had people stream sats to us a couple of times, but we've had a fair number of boosts. And of course, that is the boost method. And the boost is basically a shout out where you can say whatever you want to the podcast, what you like about the podcast, what you don't like about the podcast, a message about what's going on in your life or community, or whatever you want, really. But because it is a Lightning transaction, you are also sending value back to the podcast in the form of Satoshis. And of course, when you send a boost, we do read it on the forthcoming episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. Speaking of you, the listener, our geographic distribution of listeners by country remains as follows. Number 1, where more than half of you are listening, remains the United States of America. So hello and thank you to my fellow Americans all across the great 50 states and territories, although Spotify breaks down the territories as not included in that metric. I know scrolling through, I saw Puerto Rico listed as a country, even though Puerto Rico is part of the United States. People in Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens, but that's just the way that Spotify breaks down those metrics. Number 2 remains Singapore, so apa kabar, hello and thank you to all of you listening in Singapore. Number 3 remains Germany, so Dankeschön, mein Freunds in Deutschland. Number 4 remains Argentina, so hola, muchas gracias amigos in Argentina. Number 5 remains Luxembourg, so Dankeschön, mein Freunds in Luxembourg, or Morien to those of you speaking Luxembourgish. Number 6 remains Canada, so hello and thank you to those of you up north of the 50 United States, the continental United States anyway, not north of Canada, or not north of Alaska. But hello and thank you to those of you listening in Canada in numbers sufficient to keep you at the number 6 spot. Number 7 remains our cousins across the pond in the United Kingdom. So hello and thank you to those of you listening in the UK. Number 8 remains Spain. So hola, muchas gracias amigos in Spain. Number 9 remains Australia. So hello and thank you to those of you listening down under. We're going to talk about Australia a little bit more in the podcast. Certainly a country where Bitcoin potentially is more important than it is in the United States, or well, I guess you never really know. Things have changed so much here in the United States just in the last few months that they can obviously swing right back the other direction at the drop of a hat, depending on the outcome of the next election or political whim. But thank you to those of you listening down under. Number 10, rounding out the top 10, remains Mexico. So hola, muchas gracias amigos in Mexico. And thank you to everyone, regardless of where you find yourself listening, because it is you, the listener, knowing that you're out there, that you appreciate this podcast, that you're receiving value from this podcast, that makes it worth sitting in front of this computer and in front of this microphone every week, chatting about my favorite topic, Bitcoin, and exploring the dollar cost average theory, stacking sats together. All right, on to the news. Once again, price is almost always the number one news item that people are talking about. And despite the malaise on Bitcoin Twitter about the quote unquote lull in price action, This cycle's bull run has already been pretty incredible. According to an article in Yahoo Finance Canada, almost 16,000 Bitcoin holders have joined the Millionaires Club between January 20th and July 20th of 2025. According to a report they cite from Finbold, they say that 15,841 new millionaires bring the total of Bitcoin millionaires to 192,205, an increase of 9% in just 6 months, and an average of 88 new millionaires a day. And that is pretty cool. We mentioned Plan B in the beginning of this episode when we referenced the news of the day 4 years ago, but of course, Plan B is still around. And on Monday, he put the current price of Bitcoin into perspective by comparing it with gold's market cap, something that we do often here, when he tweeted, "Gold market cap is 20 trillion. Bitcoin market cap is $2 trillion. So gold is worth 10x Bitcoin. Gold scarcity, parentheses stock to flow ratio, is 60. Bitcoin's, I say scarcity because I hear it in Plan B's voice, but Bitcoin scarcity is 120. So Bitcoin is 2 times scarcer than gold. In my opinion, it is at least 10x undervalued." And I believe he's right, which is why a Bitcoin price of over $1 million, even this bull run, would not be impossible. I mean, heck, if Bitcoin simply continues to perform similarly to how it did in 2017, we could see more than 2 million before the top blows off. But as fun as it is to think about, remember, nobody has a crystal ball, and it's impossible for anyone to know the price of Bitcoin and what it will be on any given day. I simply believe that it will ultimately continue up and to the right on the grander scale when you zoom out until we've achieved hyper-Bitcoinization. And then, of course, when the entire world is using Bitcoin, there's no more new Bitcoin to be mined. Of course, we'll see more price stability, and those 10x, 20x gains might be the thing of the past. But that is a long way to go. Bitcoin has a long way to go. 10x, for example, just to be on par with gold. We often talk about how Bitcoin is digital gold or gold is analog Bitcoin, depending on how you want to look at it, because the two perform very similar functions. But Bitcoin does it in every way. In every way it does it better. There's a slight to vast improvements on every one of the features that makes gold sound money. So it seems logical that Bitcoin will surpass gold, but even just attaining the same market cap as gold would be a 10x from here, more than $1 million per Bitcoin. And whether that happens this cycle or not, who knows? I often said, even before, well before this halving, if you asked me to predict what I thought Bitcoin would do, again, I don't like to make predictions, but if I just pulled a theoretical guess out of thin air, I would have said maybe we hit 250 to 300,000 this bull run, and then maybe 1 million after the 2028 halving. But that was also before the ETFs. It was before Donald Trump was reelected, before Bitcoin just became so much more mainstream, before a lot of the things the anti-crypto army that was in power with the last administration was trying to do to stifle Bitcoin development. So nobody knows. That's my point. But if Bitcoin just becomes digital gold this cycle, we could very well see that price of $1 million before the euphoria phase ends. We'll eventually hit that price one way or another. Whether it's this cycle, next cycle, or 2 cycles from now remains to be seen. Altcoiners have often dreamed of, quote, the flippening. And here on the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast, well, just a few minutes ago, we spoke about the pizza flippening, but now it appears we have another Bitcoin, quote unquote, flippening milestone. The Bitcoin Genesis block famously references a headline from the Times saying, "Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks." But now, almost 16 years later, we have a Telegraph headline, which was reported by Parachutes BTC on Twitter, but as is so often the case, the gold really is in the comments. And this time that gold was by Bitcoin OG Adam Back, summarizing the headline for Parachutes BTC with his comment, 19 July 2025. Bitcoin on brink of bailout for Chancellor. Of course, they're referencing the headline where Chancellor Rachel Reeves has suggested, or it was possibly suggested, selling the Bitcoin that England has seized to help patch up the budget. The headline in the Telegraph is Rachel Reeves eyes 5 billion Bitcoin sale to help plug the black hole. Hoard of seized cryptocurrency could be offloaded to ease pressure on public finances. So it went from first they fight you to then they try and reap the benefits. And it also shows that they don't understand, or maybe they do, because politicians are very myopic. They're always looking out for what they can do to further their career immediately in the here and now, and they don't look or care about the future often. That's why they pass continuing resolutions all the time here in the United States. They don't worry about the fact that Social Security is insolvent and will eventually collapse as long as they can just kick that can down the road. So it probably isn't that Rachel Reeves knows she'd be shooting herself in the foot by selling Bitcoin for just 118,000 US dollars. She just doesn't care. As a good little communist, she just sees a pile of money, other people's money, of course, that she can raid and use for her quote-unquote public finances. TradFi edition and adoption continues its acceleration, with last Friday, Charles Schwab CEO Rick Verster on CNBC during an interview stating that they, quote, anticipate launching Bitcoin and Ether sometime soon so that our clients have access to that, saying our clients are invested in crypto today. In fact, our clients hold more than 20% of the exchange-traded product crypto in the entire industry, so they're invested. When he was pressed if Schwab would be competing with Coinbase, he replied, "It absolutely would. If they're buying their crypto at Coinbase, we would love to see them bring their crypto back to Schwab." Remember, Charles Schwab, one of the original discount brokers, one of the largest brokers for normies here in the United States, would not let you touch Bitcoin in the 10-meter cattle prod back in the day. So, how the world turns when a business looks at competitors and sees them making money hand over fist, their quote unquote principles go right out the window. And so it appears with Schwab, who Finance 2 days ago ran the headlines, Charles Schwab's crypto plans add fuel to post-earnings rally. So apparently Schwab has been making a decent amount of money and their stock has been rallying. But when the news came out that they were going to allow customers to purchase Bitcoin and Ethereum, their stock price went even more through the roof. And by through the roof, they mean like 8%, not through the roof in Bitcoin terms, which I always find moderately amusing. Speaking of mainstream and Wall Street adoption and Yahoo Finance, 9 hours ago, Yahoo Finance read the headline, Mara Holdings plans $850 million convertible note offering to fuel Bitcoin buys, repay debt. Bitcoin miner Mara Holdings said it plans to raise $850 million US dollars through a private sale of 0% convertible senior notes due in 2032. The deal, aimed exclusively at qualified institutional buyers, includes an option for initial buyers to purchase an additional $150 million US dollars of the notes, potentially bringing the total raise to $1 billion US dollars, according to a filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on Wednesday. The notes won't pay regular interest and are convertible into cash, shares of Mara stock, or mix of both, depending on the buyer's choice. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? They are set to mature in August 2032, but investors will have an option to require Marathon to repurchase those notes in 2030 if certain stock price conditions are not met. Mara will also have the right to redeem those notes starting in 2030, subject to certain thresholds. The miner plans to use a portion of the proceeds, up to $50 million, to repurchase some of its existing 1% convertible notes due in 2026, helping reduce its short-term liabilities. The rest of the funds will be used to buy more Bitcoin, support general operations, expand infrastructure, and fund strategic acquisitions, the company said. All right, so Marathon Holdings is a Bitcoin miner, one of the largest Bitcoin miners, but it's also now a Bitcoin treasury company, and they are currently the number 2 Bitcoin treasury company in terms of how much Bitcoin they hold, with approximately 50,000 Bitcoin in their treasury, which is, it seems like a lot, but to keep that in perspective, Michael Saylor's strategy holds more than 607,000 Bitcoin, more than 12 times what Mara holds. And of course, Mara has mined a heck of a lot of Bitcoin and then sold that Bitcoin. So they had the opportunity to be holding even more, but hey, you got to start somewhere, and they're already at the number 2 spot, which is pretty respectable, all things considered. On Monday, CBS News Money Watch reported Trump media buys $2 billion in Bitcoin as it pursues crypto treasury strategy. Trump Media and Technology Group, the social media company owned by President Trump, said it has bought about $2 billion in Bitcoin and related securities as it remodels itself as an investment firm. Trump Media, which owns the Truth Social app, announced in May that it planned to raise $2.5 billion to buy Bitcoin with the goal of creating a reserve of the cryptocurrency. The $2 billion Bitcoin purchase is part of the company's, quote, Bitcoin treasury plan, Trump Media CEO Devin Nunes said in a news release on Monday. Mr. Trump, the largest investor in Trump Media, has increasingly focused on cryptocurrencies. Funny they say Mr. Trump and not President Trump. If you ever read an article about Obama, they probably would still say President Obama, even though he's former President Obama. But with Trump, they just can't seem to say President before they say Mr. Trump. But I digress. Mr. Trump, the largest investor in Trump Media, has increasingly focused on cryptocurrencies, both through his private business and his administration. The company's $2 billion Bitcoin purchase comes as Trump Media looks to roll out a range of investment products, including plans to sell exchange-traded funds, or ETFs. For those of you wondering, the top 10 Bitcoin treasury companies are as follows. Number one, of course, is Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy with 607,770 Bitcoin. Number two, of course, is Mara Holdings, the Bitcoin mining company, with their 50,000 Bitcoin. Number three is 21 Capital. They are, of course, a Bitcoin holding company, CEO by Strike's Jack Mallers. They hold 37,230 Bitcoin, which is not too shabby considering they're just basically right out of the gate. Number four is the Bitcoin Standard Treasury Company with their 30,000 Bitcoin. Number five is Riot Platforms, another Bitcoin mining company with 19,200 Bitcoin. Number six being Trump Media with their 18,430 Bitcoin. Number seven, Japanese hotel company Metaplanet with their 16,352 Bitcoin. Number eight is Galaxy Digital with 12,830. Number nine is Bitcoin miner CleanSpark with 12,608 Bitcoin. And rounding out the top 10 is Tesla with 11,509 Bitcoin. And Tesla, they've kind of dropped the ball on that. They were an early leader. Remember that we just talked about them sparking an early peak, an early all-time high in 2021 with all the hype around Tesla, their purchase of Bitcoin, and they're accepting of Bitcoin, albeit ever so briefly, for Tesla automobiles. And then, of course, later they sold a big chunk of their Bitcoin. So, I mean, they're still in the top 10, but wow, talk about blowing the potential to be number one, right? They had more Bitcoin without even, they would have had significantly more Bitcoin without even purchasing anymore had they just not sold. Of course, if they had continued to accept Bitcoin for their cars and if they'd hodled that Bitcoin, who knows where they'd be, but certainly they'd be higher than number 10 because, I mean, they're only 1,000 Bitcoin below CleanSpark. And they had that. So I know the term Overton window has gotten kind of cringe. It certainly makes me cringe just saying it, looking at my notes. But I want to remind you that less than a year ago, it hasn't even been a year since the presidential election, and it's been, 5 months since the inauguration of President Donald Trump. And in just that short of a time, we went from having Operation Choke Point 2.0, SAB 121, and the now repealed broker rule to today, the president of the United States owns a company that is the 6th largest Bitcoin treasury in the world. The Overton window has certainly dramatically shifted here in the United States, but that is certainly not the case all over the world. Number go up has already changed a lot of lives, and it is certainly exciting, but don't forget the real reason Bitcoin is important, what drew me to Bitcoin in the first place, is the freedom aspect of Bitcoin, fixing the money, fixing the world, fixing the broken monetary system, and of course, along with that, restoring financial freedom to the common man. And Monday gave us a stark reminder that with a headline from Down Under where Sky News is reporting that they're apparently still full speed ahead in Australia with their plans for a central bank digital currency and the draconian nightmare that comes with it. The headline in Sky News reads, "Money that can expire. RBA laying groundwork for a dystopian financial reality where money is given a brain and then the switch is handed to someone else. The Reserve Bank is quietly helping to build a world in which money could expire or be geographically restricted by jumping feet first into the world of programmable money," writes John McGillian. So, as I mentioned, we were kind of heading along that same path. Had the election gone differently by just a few million votes, we could easily be leading Australia and the EU down this path. Fortunately, at least for the moment, we are not. regardless of what you think about Donald Trump and the Republican Congress, at least, even if they're clowns, and even if Donald Trump is just out for him and just stalking Bitcoin is like selling Trump steaks and ties and bottled water or building golf courses and casinos, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Love him or hate him, the fact of the matter is that we had an administration that was letting Elizabeth Warren write their financial policy and write their Bitcoin policies, that was actively sabotaging Bitcoin startups, Bitcoin companies, prosecuting Bitcoin entrepreneurs, prosecuting Bitcoin coders. And most of that, fortunately, at least is on pause, if not radically reversed here in the United States. And that's pretty cool. Ultimately, it will be that way everywhere because, I mean, there will always be some greedy little dictator out there who tries to oppress people. But as Bitcoin gets bigger and more mainstream, that job is going to be harder and harder. There are places like North Korea where the people are just so oppressed that they don't necessarily even have electricity. You know, the meme, the joke is that every day is Earth Day in North Korea, and they show the satellite picture of the Earth at night, and there's just a big black hole where North Korea is because there's no lights turned on. Literally, it would take that level of authoritarianism to defeat Bitcoin, or to restrict Bitcoin. You couldn't even defeat Bitcoin because there would still be people scratching out mesh networks or using smoke signals or what have you, doing transactions on paper with a pencil and passing them along to somebody that can eventually relay that transaction for them. But the point being, we're not headed that direction here in the United States right now, regardless of what other things you might think are wrong with the country. And that is certainly refreshing because, not to toot the United States' horn here, but for many, many years, the United States has been what it was Ronald Reagan that said, that last great bastion of liberty, that shining city on the hill, the example that, you know, there's hope, like the image of the Statue of Liberty standing in the bay, the harbor with the torch as a guiding light for the oppressed of the world to come seek freedom. That's more than it has been, you know, more than just a meme, more than just a motto. And it continues to be that way currently with Bitcoin, with freedom of speech, with other things that we see under assault throughout the world. And we talk about our freedoms being under assault here in the United States, but it's nowhere near as bad as it is in a lot of places. Thank God. All right. On to what makes today and every Wednesday special, and that, of course, is that today is DCA Wednesday, rounding out 4 years of dollar cost averaging. If you're just listening for the first time, if maybe the headline, the title of the episode caught your fancy, or you don't know what dollar cost averaging is, well, DCA, dollar cost averaging, is an investment strategy where you invest your money in equal portions at regular intervals, regardless of price. It's kind of the whole time in the markets beats timing the markets. So for an example, 4 years ago, we set our equal portion at just $20 US. I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to keep it relatable. Not only did I want to show that if you are a person that can only afford to scratch out just $20 US worth of Bitcoin every week, that it eventually would build an appreciable stack of Satoshis. But I wanted to show that, that you're not too late. And we chose weekly for our regular interval, once a week on Wednesdays to be specific, because I thought, well, that works out nicely for a weekly podcast, but also because almost everybody I know does their dollar cost averaging when they get their paycheck from their fiat mining job. And most of the people I know get paid every Friday, once a week. So maybe every Friday is their DCA week. And it's their DCA week, whether they know it or not, if they're contributing to like a 401k or another retirement plan where you take a portion of your paycheck out and it just automatically gets invested into whatever you have it invested in. So once a week on Wednesdays sounded reasonable, and just $20 US sounded like the way to go. And this is going to be now our 209th stack. I know there's 52 weeks in a year, but there was a leap year in there. So there were 209 Wednesdays in the last 4 years. We started all the way back on Wednesday, July 28th, 2021. And in the 208 preceding Wednesdays, we converted a total of $4,160 US, just $20 at a time. It's another thing I wanted to show, that even though $20 seems like it might not be that much money, when you're consistent, it adds up. If you only have $20 that you can afford to roll into Bitcoin, $4,160 might seem like an impossibility, but over just 4 years, which went by in the blink of an eye. It seems like a lot of time when you're standing at the beginning looking 4 years into the future. But sitting here behind this microphone right now, it feels like this podcast has barely just begun. And in that time, we converted $4,160 US into Bitcoin, just $20 a week. And that purchased us more than 0.1 Bitcoin, 10,838,220 Satoshis to be precise, currently worth 12,865 US dollars, despite the fact we have only converted 4,160 US dollars. So quite an appreciable gain already, almost 3x, more than 3x what we invested. And that's with Bitcoin only at 118,000. When Bitcoin goes to 100,000, 200,000, a million, 10 million, a billion, those gains are going to be astronomical. So by purchasing every Wednesday, regardless of price, we purchased at an average price of just $38,382.69. We purchased as little for as low as just $16,469 during that low set in November of 2022. And now our highest purchase that we've ever made was 2 weeks ago when we purchased it 119,000. Last DCA Wednesday when we purchased. I'm looking at July 16th. That's 2 weeks ago. No, it's 1 week ago. I'm getting ahead of myself here. We purchased for $119,322.97. That was still below the all-time high of 123,000. But again, when you look at this on a zoomed out basis, and you draw dots every Wednesday, 119,322 is the highest ever Bitcoin price on a Wednesday. But either way, the point being, we purchased the lows and all the way up to the all-time high, but our average purchase remains $38,382.69, and that is the beauty of dollar cost averaging. The other neat thing about having 0.1 Bitcoin, more than 10 million sats, getting close to 11 million sats now, is remember, if you think about it, there's more than 8 billion people in the world. And if all 21 million Bitcoin, including the lost Bitcoin and the Bitcoin that hadn't been mined, the Bitcoin that's being hoarded by Michael Saylor and the like, Satoshi's coins, if all 21 million Bitcoin were put in a pot and divided equally among the entire global population, each person could only ever have a maximum of 259,259 Satoshis. We already have 10 million, substantially more than 10x. Which is really cool. But if you think about it, and you want to be more generous, let's say of the 8.1 billion people in the world, maybe there's only about 6.5 million adults, and not all of them are heads of household, and only about 5 billion people even have access to any kind of banking whatsoever. Something Bitcoin ultimately fixes, but use this as a number and you get a more conservative estimate of how many Satoshis that you could ever hope to have. And you were still talking about 425,000 Satoshis per person or per head of banked household. And again, we have more than 10 million sats. So 23x what the average person could ever hope to have. We have it already. And you do too, if you've been stacking alongside us the last 209 Wednesdays now. All right. So to grow the stack, once again, we're going to use Strike. It's kind of a shame. We spent the majority of the 4 years purchasing with Cash App, but Cash App had to go on more than double their fees. They were already one of the more expensive ways to stack Bitcoin. I liked them because they were convenient. The fees weren't that bad considering we were just buying 20 US dollars. But man, with that last fee change, the fee increase that went through about a month ago now, I just had to switch. So here we are finishing out the 4 years with a different company, and we're using Strike. We spoke about Jack Mahler not too long ago when we were talking about treasury companies because he has 21. But this is, again, one of those you do you things. Neither Strike nor Cash App have ever been sponsors of the show. We've never had a sponsor of the show. We still don't have any sponsors. I just like to talk about the companies that I like, the companies that I use. Of course, this is a you do you thing. Cash App, Strike, whatever might not even be available where you're listening. So pick a reputable exchange that suits your needs. The most important thing, though, is that when you accumulate an appreciable amount of Bitcoin, I like to think of it as when I have enough Bitcoin that it's more than I would feel comfortable carrying around cash in my wallet. So if you would feel comfortable carrying $100 in your wallet, but you wouldn't feel comfortable carrying $500 around, when you get to that threshold, you should definitely transfer it to a hardware wallet. You don't want to transfer such little amounts of Bitcoin that when mining fees are up, that Bitcoin becomes functionally unspendable because mining fees would eat the entirety or a significant portion of the amount of Bitcoin that you have. My thoughts on this have evolved. It used to be, I thought, well, you need at least 1 million sats before you send it to cold storage just to be safe. But 1 million sats is a lot of money now. So that's a you do you thing. But the important thing is if you take that Bitcoin into custody, you get it off the exchange, as long as you're using a reputable exchange, heck, even if you were using FTX, back in the day, none of that mattered if you didn't keep your Bitcoin with them. When they went out of business, they didn't have your Bitcoin to steal if it's sitting in your hardware wallet. Again, I know I've emphasized that to ad nauseum, and the whole not your keys, not your coins thing, not your keys, not your cheese thing it's like beating a dead horse, but it is important. And the point being, use whatever platform you want is what I'm saying. Just make sure that you self-custody your Bitcoin. And as long as you're not using some weird exchange no one's ever heard of, you should be fine. All right, so this time I don't actually have any money on Strike, so I have to add money. And that's cool because I have a bank account and a debit card linked to Strike. So it's just a matter of transferring in $20. They make it immediately available to purchase Bitcoin. I have a restriction on my account because it's fairly new that I can only purchase and transfer $200 of the Bitcoin at a time to my hardware wallet before the funds have settled, but I only need $20. And it wouldn't break my heart to have to wait till I had $200 or $300 of the Bitcoin to transfer it anyway. Again, that's a tangent I'm getting off on, but I've got $20 on Cash App on Strike now, so it's just a matter of tapping buy Bitcoin, entering $20, tapping OK, and boom, just like that, we purchased another 16,688 Satoshis. Bitcoin pumped a little bit while I've been yammering because we paid $118,708.05 for that Bitcoin. More like 119,000 by the time you add the fees and the spread. But the point being, those 16,688 additional Satoshis bring our stack up to 10,854,908 sats, currently worth about $12,885. Again, not too shabby considering we've only converted $4,180 into Satoshis. It also raises that average cost basis by another $125. So our new average cost basis is now $38,507.93. But the cool thing is we were already about 3x what we've put in US dollars into Bitcoin. And as I always said, you ain't seen nothing yet. When Bitcoin hits $200,000, which I think is more than reasonable this cycle still, that stack would have a US dollar value of $21,709.81. When Bitcoin eventually hits 1 million US dollars, and Standard Chartered believes they're going to do so, but Bitcoin will do so by the end of this year. Who knows when it happens, other than the fact I believe it will happen eventually. But without buying another Satoshi, our current stack, when Bitcoin hits $1 million, would have a US dollar value of $108,549.08. An insane return for just $4,180 US dollars. And of course, significantly more, what do we say, 23 times more Bitcoin than the average person will ever hope to be able to attain when they eventually do get off zero. Adam Back said that he believes by 2032 that Bitcoin will be worth $10 million per coin. We've mentioned Adam Back a few times. He's an OG. He's actually referenced in the white paper by Satoshi as an inspiration for Bitcoin. When his prediction of 10 million Bitcoin comes true, regardless of when that happens, our current stack would have a US dollar value of more than 1 million US dollars, $1,085,490.80 to be exact. And of course, the biggest prediction we've been following was Fidelity's 1 billion US dollar Bitcoin prediction back in January of 2022. Fidelity's director of global macro, Jurian Timmer, said that they believe that by the year 2038, a single Bitcoin will be worth 1 billion US dollars, billion with a B. And when Bitcoin is eventually worth 1 billion US dollars, our current stack would have a US dollar value of more than $100 million. $108,549,080 US dollars to be exact. Imagine securing generational wealth. And that's what $108 million is for almost anybody. I mean, even for Michael Saylor, $108 million is very significant. But imagine securing generational wealth at just $20 a week for 4 years. And if you've been stacking alongside us, this entire time, when Bitcoin hits $1 billion, that will be you. You will be the person that they're writing articles about saying, if you'd purchased just $4,180 worth of Bitcoin back in 2021 to 2025, you'd have more than $100 million right now. And people will be saying you got lucky, that you didn't do anything to earn it. And of course, we know better. If you've been hodling even just $20 a week, you know that at times it's been gloomy. So anyway, that's not too shabby considering we converted just $4,180. Again, if you're doing you and following along and $20 a week was nothing and you've been stacking $200 a week, well, you'd have 10x the Bitcoin that we have. And you'd have $1 billion when Bitcoin hits $1 billion. And that's pretty exciting. You'd have more than one Bitcoin. All right, before I go, as usual, I would like to ask you to help support the podcast by feeding that algorithm monster. And one of the ways you can do so is by rating and reviewing this podcast on whichever podcast platform you're listening. If you could give us a 5-star review and share this podcast with a friend or family member, that would do wonders for helping promote this podcast. Another way that you can help promote this podcast is by making sure you're following us on Twitter or X. On Twitter, we are at BTC Bulletin Pod, like the podcast, Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast, at BTC Bulletin Pod. We have way more listeners than we have Twitter followers. I know a lot of people stopped using X. Some people have never used X, but if you are one of the people listening to this podcast right now, you're on Twitter and you're not following us, you can do tremendous things for this podcast by simply clicking follow. Quickly, before you do that, review our feed, and you'll see I don't spam you. I put 1 or 2 things a week, maybe on Twitter, maybe something we're getting ready to talk about, and then notifications about when we've recorded a podcast. And that's it. Of course, most importantly, I love hearing from you. It's really cool to receive those boosts and to get to read them on the podcast, but I also love hearing from you on Twitter or X, and my DMs are open. They're open right now. I do read my DMs. I do respond to my DMs if they're not spam. Of course, if you're not on Twitter, you can always send me a good old-fashioned email. My email is also open right now, and the email for the podcast is bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. That's bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. It is hard to believe that it has been 4 years. Of course, the official anniversary of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast is in a couple of days, but we've stacked 4 solid years worth of Wednesdays. So I'm not ready to blow the candles out on the birthday cake yet, but it's hard to believe it's been 4 years. It is flattering and humbling that many of you have been following along for the entirety of those 4 years, that you've appreciated the podcast enough to reach out and say hi. And I can't tell you how much that means. I say flattering and humbling, and those words don't even put it into perspective, because, you know, if you don't have any real Bitcoin friends in real life, maybe you don't know, but when you do meet that first Bitcoin friend in real life, the feeling is just amazing, because you've met somebody that you have a deep connection with automatically, regardless of who they are, where they're from, what they do for their fiat mining job, regardless of everything else that's going on in the world. It's like meeting a brother. We jokingly call Bitcoin a religion or a cult in many ways, shapes, or form. And it really is like meeting a kin. And so knowing that there's hundreds of you out there listening to this podcast that I haven't even met, it's like that feeling on steroids. And so that is really cool. So thank you again from the bottom of my heart. But we will continue this stacking journey. We're going to continue the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. We're going to keep growing that stack as long as there is someone out there willing to sell us Satoshis for a US dollar $20 bill, or the digital equivalent on Strike or whichever app we end up using at the time. One of the things that I might change now that we've done 4 solid years is I keep kicking around the idea of doing a set it and forget it and auto DCA. The neat thing about Strike is if you do auto DCA, they don't charge any fees. So the 20 cents or whatever we paid in fees to stack today, that could have been Satoshis. Could have been an extra 200 Satoshis or so. I haven't pulled the trigger on that yet for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to do a solid 4 years of stacking in real time, because that was really the goal, to do a full cycle of stacking, to see exactly how it played out, how we benefited by using dollar cost averaging, by stacking every week, what we could do with just 20 US dollars. obviously we've done a lot. We have more than 1 point Bitcoin, and that's really cool. But there's also something neat about stacking in real time instead of just reading statistics off of a list of prepared notes. So we'll see how that goes. But one thing is for sure, we will continue to stack and we'll continue bringing you the news. So along those lines, don't forget to join us next Wednesday and every Wednesday while we continue our Bitcoin journey together. And until that time, keep on stacking those sats, you sexy sat stackers.